I had announced my resignation back in November, largely due to family reasons, but quite simply couldn't sit on the sidelines after seeing what the Prime Minister was, the ambitious agenda he was undertaking across the country and across the world. Quite honestly, it was the speech in Davos where you took everything head on, and I think for me that's where a lot of the world changed. I think it opened a lot of eyes for Canadians.
The voice of Edmonton Riverbend MP Matt Genereux explaining why he has now made the decision to cross the floor, leave the Conservatives, and join the Liberals. He's the third floor crosser for the Liberals, but they are still 3 seats away from a majority. But there are by-elections on the horizon. Let's try and get a lay of the land, what's happening in Ottawa. The one and only, and I mean it when I use those terms, the one and only Vassy Kapelos, the host of the Vassy Kapelos Show, is on the line. Hi, Vassy. How you doing?
Hi. I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing great. First things first, do you buy what Matt Genereux is selling yesterday and the reasoning?
I'll say bluntly no, only because, and I'm not trying to ascribe any necessarily nefarious motivation, but the idea that just because the Davos speech was made, that he picked up the phone, I know is demonstrably false, because for months since he decided not to cross, when he originally said he was leaving politics, many Liberals have said their efforts to have him change his mind continued. Mm-hmm. And that was even up until the weekend that Pierre Poilievre gave his speech at the Conservative Convention. A number of Liberals then were telling me, so much so that I had one of our producers reach out to the Speaker's office at the time to see if Genereux had actually given his official notification he was leaving. And we basically found out he hadn't, which further made me think, oh, there's stuff going on underway. So I'm not sure. Maybe the stuff about the agenda and all that kind of thing is certainly true from Genereux's perspective, but the idea that it was Davos that clinched the deal or that made it happen, I'm not 100% sure on that.
Other things we're hearing in the background, murmurs, is well, it's not over here on the floor crossing. What are you hearing on that front? Do you think there are more coming?
I think so. I think for a couple of reasons. Now, I don't know for sure if they will come to fruition, but I do know for sure that efforts are underway to encourage others to make a similar move. And I remember even very distinctly back to a few months ago, Matt Genereux and people close to him were saying that he really didn't want to be kind of moving over alone, that there was some sort of comfort, I guess, as it was described to me in numbers. I do know for sure, it's even been described by a few MPs to me from the Liberal benches as they have 3 categories of people they're targeting: people who narrowly won their election, for example, people who ideologically are opposed to the sort of what Pierre Poilievre's stance on certain things is, or don't feel welcome in the party that way. And then the third category is really people who might not be or are not eligible for their pension until next year. So might want to say, So where there's, overlay in some of those categories, that's who they're really going after, kind of thing. So if they're at that level of specificity about kind of the strategic operation that's underway, then I think for sure that there's a possibility of more.
Those who have crossed the floor so far, have they received anything an additional title, a new responsibility, something like that? Is there a payoff here beyond, joining and being in government and not sitting on the opposition for another year?
I mean, the primary payoff is exactly that, right? And to be fair to them, they may find ideologically where Mark Carney is not egregious to them, and that they would get more done in government. But yes, the big payoff is government. Secondarily, we saw, not with Chris d'Entremont, no evidence of that yet, but with Michael Ma, for example, he played a big role in the trip to China. No necessarily official title associated with that, but certainly expanded profile associated with it. And then in this instance, there is this new title of an economic and security advisor to the Prime Minister. I did clarify yesterday, one of our staffers did, that it's not a paid position, that there's no extra money going to that.
Okay.
But he does retain this title around the economy and security, and the way in which he was speaking was certainly that would involve the issue of national unity too. I don't really understand the details of that. I'll be transparent, but that's what they were saying yesterday.
Does this change the dynamic of whether or not to call a spring election? Obviously, it's the numbers game here. Can you get to a majority? But even if they could get to a majority, do you think Mark Carney, riding so high in the polls, will still end up calling a general election?
I think it's a great way of framing the question because I think, look, when you take all the actions in the aggregate right now, it certainly looks like they're trying to avoid one, right? That they might be able through by-elections and more floor crossings to attain a fairly slim majority. A slim majority is not the greatest of positions to be in. It's better than a strong minority, but it's still not, you could have a couple of people get sick. You could have a couple of people who decide to leave for personal reasons, et cetera, and then you're back to square one almost again. I think you're absolutely right to point out that the polling might end up dictating the final answer to that question. That's not, unique to the Liberals. Any political party would do that if they had in their control the ability to call an election. If it becomes like we've seen a bit of a trend, right, wherein they've been neck and neck, the two parties, even though the personal numbers for Poilievre and Carney are quite disparate. The parties have been neck and neck now for a while. Many polls, the majority of them, I would say, are starting to show a widening lead for the Liberals. If that lead becomes more pronounced and more consistent, meaning like every poll starts showing that they're 10 or 15 points ahead of the Liberals and the Conservatives, and they show that for a month, I'd be hard-pressed to say that the Prime Minister would decide against an election in that circumstance.
And the other side of things, Vassy, will there be more people leaving the Liberal Party, right? Chrystia Freeland, Bill Blair, Nate Erskine-Smith will leave, right? I heard murmurs that there will be a few other people looking for career change here. Is that also entering the picture on the decision-making?
Yeah, there could definitely be more by-elections. In the case of Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, he hasn't even vacated his seat yet. He says he'll do that, I guess, when the race gets underway in earnest provincially. But that's kind of a safe Liberal seat. The other one to watch is Jonathan Wilkinson, who used to be the Minister of Natural Resources. He was supposed to be in that group of like Bill Blair, et cetera, who got appointed to positions. He was supposed to go somewhere in Europe. For months, that's been like heavily speculated, even reported on pretty specifically. That hasn't been announced yet, but that would lead to a by-election as well. So that's not necessarily 100% safe for the Liberals, though. So, I never want to sort of decide the outcome of by-elections. I think there are certain seats that are safer, but you never know. So it's a risk for sure. But it all, like on the face of it, adds up to probably a lower chance of an election, a general election. But I maintain, if you've got 10 public opinion polls 2 months from now showing a 15-point lead for the Liberals, I'd be surprised if they didn't try and take advantage of that.
And to wrap up here, Vassy, you're Per Poilievre. You're looking in the mirror. What are you thinking?
I mean, you're not thinking this is a great time. That's for sure. I think you're thinking, oh, God, I don't want to take more questions on my leadership. And I think the reality is that he will. I think there's a narrative emerging with 3 people under his watch who have left his party to go to the governing Liberals, that there are issues with his leadership, despite that pronounced mandate that he got at the convention, right? And I think if that starts to trickle even further down into caucus, and he starts getting questions every time he takes to a microphone about his own leadership. We saw how that went, right, with Justin Trudeau. I spent 18 months covering nothing but the implosion of his leadership. So once that takes hold, it's hard to escape. And I would imagine that he and his team are very concerned about that.
Maybe he should think about crossing the floor. That could change Canadian politics.
Boy. There'd be nothing to cover anymore after that.
Vassy, we'll be listening to your show, which airs right after this one. You're so great. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. You're great, too. I appreciate you making the time.
Vassy Kapelos, host of The Vassy Kapelos Show.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years. And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.